So, welcome to the deep dive. Today, we are looking at a stack of sources that honestly just fundamentally reject the reality we live in.
Yeah, they really do.
I mean, we have these heavily redacted structural blueprints of a decommissioned 1990s government weather outpost and meticulously detailed indigenous anthropological field notes.
Right. Translated directly from local geographical archives.
Exactly. And sitting at the absolute center of this entire investigation is this physical artifact. It's a chemically degraded, heavily charred diary of a man named Captain Elias.
Which is just a fascinating piece of evidence on its own.
Oh, absolutely. So for you listening right now, whether you are analyzing data sets in a lab or commuting home or just fiercely curious about the fringes of theoretical physics, our mission today is to completely dissect case file 55 sigma.
Also widely referred to in the source material as the frozen broadcast.
The frozen broadcast, right? So we are stripping away the mythology here.
Yeah, we want to examine a localized environment where the fundamental laws of, well, thermodynamics, optics, biology, and linear time just appear to have suffered a catastrophic fracture.
A total breakdown.
Yeah.
And we're focusing specifically on the Aegis 7 weather station. This is a structure perched near the lethal summit of Blackwood Peak.
The goal here is to really analyze the empirical data left behind. We want to attempt to construct a working model for how a physical space can simply stop obeying the rules of the universe.
Right. And to understand that, we first have to understand the environment of Blackwood Peak, because its sheer hostility to organic life is, it's visceral.
It really is.
The topographical data in the dossier paints a picture of this extreme, punishing altitude. The air pressure up there is so radically low that the available oxygen is just a fraction of what humans actually require.
Yeah, the field notes describe the sensation of breathing up there as pulling glass into your lungs.
Glass in your lungs? Just imagine that.
Your alveolar permeability drops, and your body essentially initiates this desperate, failing physiological war just to oxygenate your blood.
Which is terrifying. And sitting in the absolute center of this freezing, hypoxic wasteland is the Aegis 7 station. Now, according to the government blueprints, it was officially decommissioned and abandoned in 1994.
Right, which is a detail that establishes our baseline. The structure has been subjected to decades of unmaintained isolation in, frankly, one of the planet's most aggressive microclimates.
Yeah, and the exterior of the station reflects this perfectly. Like, the survey photos show a structure completely entombed in 6 inches of solid, opaque black ice.
It presents an impenetrable dead shell.
Exactly. And, thermodynamics dictates that the interior temperature should perfectly mirror that exterior environment, right?
It should be lethal deep freeze conditions. The thermal equilibrium of a metal box encased in ice is absolute.
But the moment investigators actually breached that frozen airlock and stepped onto the main deck, the concept of thermal equilibrium just vanished.
Completely out the window.
Because the interior of this uninsulated metal box, which is encased entirely in sub-zero ice, is documented at a staggering, suffocating 40 degrees Celsius.
Which is 104 degrees Fahrenheit.
Yeah, inside a glacier.
It's wild. The sheer volume of energy required to maintain a temperature difference of that magnitude without melting the external ice shell. Well, it points to an intense, hyper-localized thermal anomaly.
Right. The heat is somehow contained perfectly within the geometry of the room. It's failing to radiate outward into the ice.
And the olfactory data collected by the recovery team just deepens the contradiction.
Oh, the smells. Let's talk about the smells.
Because if you're entering a 40-degree room inside a glacier, standard environmental degradation suggests you'd smell melting frost, damp oxidation, rust.
Stagnant water, yeah.
Exactly. But the primary investigators noted 2 highly specific, conflicting chemical signatures in the air: the sharp metallic tang of ozone and the distinct scent of old parchment.
Okay, let's unpack this for a second, because those 2 chemical profiles should not exist in the same ecosystem. They just shouldn't.
No, they really shouldn't.
The smell of ozone is the byproduct of the dielectric breakdown of air. It is the scent of oxygen molecules being violently cleaved apart and recombining. You smell that after a massive lightning strike, right?
Right, or standing next to heavily arcing high-voltage transformers. It implies an immense, raw electrical presence.
But then the smell of old parchment, that is the scent of lignin and cellulose degrading over centuries, it implies ancient dry decay.
So we are looking at an atmospheric signature where deep, ancient history is somehow colliding with an active, high-voltage energy field.
And the source of that chemical collision is situated directly in the center of the main deck. According to the blueprints, this area is designated for communications equipment.
And the focal point of the anomaly is this massive vintage 1990s radio transmitter.
And it is actively glowing red hot.
Yeah, the internal vacuum tubes are sparking, which is what's sustaining that ozone production we talked about. And the device is continuously screaming an audio signal into the frozen void.
But here's the thing. I am looking at the maintenance logs from the 1994 decommissioning, right? The primary generators were physically extracted from the mountain.
They took them out completely.
Yes. The diesel fuel lines were purged and sealed. There are 0 external power cables connected to the chassis of this transmitter.
None.
So we are looking at a heavy-duty piece of archaic communication hardware pulling this massive sustained voltage, enough to glow red hot and spark.
All while drawing from an absolute void.
It is basically a locked room mystery applied to the conservation of energy. It makes no sense.
Well, the immediate hypothesis, which was heavily debated in the initial reports, centers on human physiology, specifically hypoxia-induced delirium.
Ah, right. Blaming the brain.
Exactly. When the human cerebral cortex is starved of oxygen and simultaneously subjected to 40-degree ambient heat, the brain's visual and auditory processing centers misfire catastrophically.
So the theory is that the brain will just synthesize hallucinations to rationalize the physiological trauma.
That's the idea. The red-hot transmitter, the screaming audio, the contradictory smells. A skeptic analyzing the physiological data would classify all of this as a highly detailed, shared environmental hallucination born from altitude sickness.
I mean, the safety net of the hypoxic hallucination theory is incredibly tempting. It allows us to keep the laws of physics intact and just blame the fragile human brain, you know.
It's the comforting answer.
But the dossier systematically dismantles that safety net with physically measurable environmental alterations. The runt itself is reacting to an impossible set of rules, completely independent of human perception.
And that brings us to the primary physical impossibility documented by the investigators, the one that fundamentally breaks our understanding of optics.
The shadows. We really need to focus on this because this is where the physics completely shatter. Let's examine the shadows cast by the furniture bolted to the deck of the station.
Right, the desks and chairs.
Because in any standard space, photons from a light source travel in a straight line, they strike an opaque object, and they create an area of blocked light on the opposite side.
A shadow.
Exactly. It is linear and predictable. But inside Aegis 7, the shadows cast by the furniture are pointing directly toward the windows. They are pointing toward the ambient light of the sun bleeding through the external ice.
What's fascinating here is the sheer defiance of photon behavior. I mean, think about it. The only localized visible light source inside that room is the red-hot glowing transmitter in the center.
Right.
Basic geometry dictates the shadow should stretch outward from the transmitter, expanding toward the perimeter walls. Instead, they orient themselves entirely toward the external ambient light.
It honestly mimics a corrupted rendering engine in a computer simulation. Like, when a three-dimensional lighting matrix breaks, the localized light sources decouple from the objects, and the shadows invert.
Yeah, they point back at the primary light sink.
It is quite literally a photographic negative of reality. And the recovery team documented an even more staggering optical failure regarding these shadows.
The flashlight test.
The flashlight test. So an investigator activated a high-lumen tactical flashlight and aimed the beam directly at these inverted shadows. And you would expect the shadow to vanish, right?
Of course.
But the shadows did not react. They absorbed the new photon stream without shifting, without fading, or moving at all.
Yeah, the documentation refers to them as frozen shadows, which is a term that requires a complete suspension of standard optical physics.
Because a shadow isn't a physical thing.
Exactly. A shadow is not a physical structure. It is merely an absence of illumination. It possesses no mass to be frozen.
So if you shine a light on it, it has to disappear.
Right. If a secondary superior light source is introduced, the area of absence must be eradicated. The failure of the flashlight beam to affect the shadows suggests the space inside the Aegis 7 station is operating under an isolated breakdown of CPT symmetry.
Okay, CTT symmetry. Charge, parity, and time reversal. Can you explain the breakdown of that? Because the concept of a shadow refusing to move implies the light itself is acting backward, right?
That's exactly what it implies. In theoretical physics, if you invert the time variable in the standard equations governing electromagnetic waves, light ceases to act as an emission and begins to act as a sink.
So it pulls light in instead of pushing it out.
Exactly. The source draws photons backward from the environment. So if the local space inside the station is experiencing a temporal disruption, the shadows are not frozen.
What are they then?
They are essentially optical scars, permanently etched into the localized space-time fabric, completely detached from the present tense light sources in the room.
Optical scars, that is just incredible. And that optical distortion in the room seamlessly connects to the kinetic distortion they documented on the main console.
Right, sitting beside the screaming transmitter is a secondary anomaly. And this one provides a measurable metric for the invisible energy field saturating the station.
Yeah, the gold. Investigators found a small stack of gold coins resting on the metal surface. But they aren't just sitting there. And they aren't subjected to a localized zero-gravity field either.
No, they aren't just floating gently like objects in orbital freefall.
No, they are suspended millimeters above the console, and they are vibrating at an incredibly violent, extreme frequency.
The physical data points to an application of immense localized kinetic energy.
Hmm.
I mean, gold possesses a phenomenal density. It's roughly 19.3 grams per cubic centimeter.
It's heavy.
Very heavy. So suspending a dense atomic structure like that in a terrestrial gravitational field requires a massive constant upward force.
And the vibration of the coins is creating visual distortions in the air, right? It's documented as shimmering waves radiating outward from the console.
Yeah, it's textbook acoustic levitation. In high-end laboratory settings, scientists use precisely calibrated ultrasonic transducers to blast high-frequency sound waves.
Right, creating standing waves with acoustic nodes.
Exactly. The pressure differentials in those nodes can trap and levitate small, low-density objects like water droplets or pieces of styrofoam.
But what we are seeing in Aegis 7 is acoustic levitation scaled up to a catastrophic, reality-breaking degree. I mean, it's weaponized against heavy, precious metals.
And that shimmering visual distortion you mentioned, that's the Schlieren effect. It's the violent compression and refraction of light passing through extreme localized changes in air density.
So the Schlieren distortion generated by the vibrating gold is basically the visual fingerprint of the audio frequency dominating the room.
That's a great way to put it. We have a sealed environment sustaining 40 degrees of thermal energy, localized gravity failures, and optical inversions.
Heat, sound, and kinetic motion, they are really merely different expressions of energy.
Yes, the Aegis 7 station is entirely flooded by an invisible hyperactive force that is actively overriding the conservation of mass and energy.
So the station is acting as a resonant chamber.
Exactly. The physical impossibilities we are observing are the friction of our universe's laws grinding against a massive, localized energy surge.
Okay, so the acoustic energy driving that friction brings us directly to the audio signal itself. Because the unpowered, red-hot transmitter is not broadcasting static.
No, Mrs.
And it is not broadcasting the randomized white noise of an electrical malfunction. It is outputting highly structured, sequenced data.
It is a continuous loop of Morse code.
Yes, and here is where it gets really interesting and where we need to focus, because this blew my mind. Morse code is an inherently human, highly rudimentary binary system of dots and dashes designed for alphabetic communication.
Right. It's basically the simplest form of data transmission we have.
So when the investigative team ran the audio through decryption software, they were expecting a standard output, a distressed SOS from a lost expedition, automated weather telemetry, or maybe a lingering classified military cipher.
Something human.
Exactly, something human. But the decrypted output did not yield words or numerical coordinates. The dots and dashes mapped out an agonizingly long, incredibly complex sequence of quaternary biological coordinates.
The transmission is an unbroken sequence of genomic data.
It's DNA. And the translation process alone exposes the absurdity of this event. Because deconstructing the quaternary base pairs of DNA, adenine, cytosine, thymine, and guanine, and translating that vast four-letter biological alphabet into a two-symbol acoustic Morse code is just an exercise in computational inefficiency.
It's mind-boggling. The human genome contains billions of base pairs. Even a simpler organism requires gigabytes of pure data to map.
So to broadcast a full genetic sequence via Morse code at 20 words per minute would take years of unbroken transmission. Years.
Yet the machine is successfully looping the precise genetic sequence of a highly specific local species, the mountain eagle.
Okay, but the biological impossibility supersedes the technological paradox here, right? Because when we examine the evolutionary timeline of the species in question, things get really dark.
Right, because paleobiological records confirm the mountain eagle endemic to the Blackwood Peak region suffered total extinction roughly 10,000 years ago.
10,000 years. I am looking at the sheer impossibility of the data flow here. A mechanical weather station manufactured in the late 20th century, completely severed from any power grid, is successfully processing and broadcasting the quaternary genetic code of a biological organism that was erased from the biosphere 10 millennia before the invention of the microchip.
It's completely irrational.
The transmitter possesses no internal memory banks capable of storing a fraction of a genome. It has no sequencing hardware. How is this possible?
Well, if we conclude the hardware is incapable of generating or storing the data independently, we must reevaluate the role of the machine within the environment.
Okay, so what is the machine doing if it's not the source?
The transmitter is not acting as a source. It is acting as a crude mechanical transducer.
Oh, I see. So if the machine isn't the hard drive, the only remaining closed system large enough to store the data is the environment itself. The mountain is the hard drive.
Exactly. The concept of environmental data retention, specifically lithic data storage within geological formations, has been proposed in theoretical physics to explain the preservation of ancient quantum states.
So the mountain itself has retained the genetic memory of the extinct eagle for 10,000 years.
Yes, and the intense energy anomaly saturating the Aegis 7 station is essentially excavating that ancient biological data from the bedrock. It's forcing it through the path of least resistance, which just happens to be the abandoned human technology on the main deck.
The environment is translating the infinite complexity of 10,000-year-old biology into the crude, binary acoustic pulses of 1990s hardware, simply because that is the only language the available conduit is capable of expressing.
That's right. The station is functioning as a giant, terrifying acoustic horn for the deep geological memory of Blackwood Peak.
The mountain is quite literally screaming its own ancient history into the radio spectrum. That is horrifying.
It really is. The transmission of ancient genomic data presents a monumental shift in our understanding of environmental memory. But, the data remains abstract up to this point. It's just a sequence of acoustic pulses.
Right, it's just dots and dashes.
Exactly. The dossier, however, transitions from theoretical physics into profound psychological terror when the timeline of the anomaly intersects with the human consciousness of Captain Elias.
Ah, yes. The recovered diary of Captain Elias. This serves as the critical bridge between the environmental physics and human perception. And the physical condition of the diary alone corroborates the thermal data we talked about earlier.
Yeah, the pages are heavily charred, the binding is melted.
Which indicates survival through an intense, localized thermal event. So the heat anomaly was not a recent development. It was actively cycling during Elias's command.
And the text inside the diary provides this chilling first-hand documentation of the anomaly evolving from passive physics to active manipulation.
Elias's final coherent entry is just burned into my brain. He writes, "We aren't recording the weather anymore. The weather is recording us."
And that phrasing implies a stark realization regarding the flow of information. I mean, the station was built to extract meteorological data from the environment.
Right.
But Elias observed a complete inversion of that dynamic. The environment was extracting observational data from the crew.
And he documents a specific incident that perfectly illustrates this inversion. He writes about a moment of profound mechanical frustration. The dial on the transmitter had seized, and the machine was acting autonomously, just ignoring his manual inputs.
And as he was physically wrestling with the hardware, a voice manifested.
Yes, and he explicitly notes the acoustic origin of the sound. It did not emit from the radio's integrated speaker cone. The vocalization resonated outward from the physical architecture of the room. The steel walls of the station were speaking.
The structural resonance of the room had been co-opted. The architectural materials, the steel bulkheads, the floor plates, were acting as a massive, unified acoustic driver.
Which is deeply unsettling on an acoustic level, but the content of the vocalization completely dismantles the linear progression of time, because the voice vibrating out of the walls was Elias's own voice.
His own voice.
And it was not an echo. An echo is an acoustic reflection of a past event, bouncing back to the observer. The voice Elias heard was his own, narrating a sequence of highly specific physical actions he was going to take 5 minutes into the future.
It was a pre-echo.
A pre-echo. So what does this all mean for our understanding of reality in that room? Let's examine the mechanics of time through the lens of the block universe theory, which you brought up earlier.
Right.
Because if the universe isn't a linear progression of events happening one after another, but rather a massive four-dimensional block of space-time where the past, present, and future all exist simultaneously.
Then human consciousness is just a spotlight moving along a track.
Exactly, illuminating one slice of the block at a time, and we call the illuminated slice now.
The block universe model, which is rooted in Einstein's theory of general relativity, fundamentally asserts that the past is not gone and the future is not unwritten. They are simply coordinates on the space-time axis that our consciousness is not currently aligned with.
So the experience of time flowing is just a localized psychological illusion?
Basically, yes. So if Blackwood Peak is a location where the structural integrity of that space-time block is heavily compromised, the spotlight of consciousness is bleeding across the boundaries.
The timeline isn't just leaking, it's aggressively transmitting. The walls of the Aegis 7 station intercepted the acoustic data of Elias's voice from a coordinate 5 minutes ahead on the timeline and played it backward into his present.
The walls were narrating his unwritten actions.
And the narrative specificities Elias recorded in the diary validate the temporal collapse. The temporal voice instructed him to walk across the room, open his sealed, vacuum-packed emergency rations, and retrieve a white feather from inside the plastic.
A completely sealed, environmentally isolated ration pack.
Yes. Elias's log details the terrifying climax of this instruction. He succumbs to the psychological pressure of the pre-echo. He walks across the room, he rips open the vacuum-sealed foil pack, and sitting amidst the dehydrated food blocks is a pristine white feather.
And the manifestation of that feather forces a critical reevaluation of the anomaly's capabilities.
Right.
Because we must synthesize this physical artifact with the genetic data we discussed previously.
Right, the eagle DNA. We have an unpowered transmitter successfully decoding and broadcasting the genetic sequence of a mountain eagle extinct for 10 millennia. And we have a captain pulling a white feather from a sealed container, guided by his own voice from the future.
The feather fundamentally belongs to the extinct eagle.
So the anomaly is not restricted to the abstract transfer of data or sound waves. It possesses the capability to physically transport biological matter across the space-time block.
The physical manifestation represents the peak of the localized anomaly. But, the most vital, horrific detail recorded in Elias's final log concerns the thermodynamic state of the artifact.
Oh, God, yes.
Elias notes, with profound dread, that when he held the white feather in his hand, it was still warm.
The thermodynamics of the feather completely shatter any remaining illusion of simple information transfer. I mean, if a feather is warm, it holds the residual body heat of a living biological organism.
Exactly.
So the Aegis 7 station is not just reading the genetic data of a 10,000-year-old bird from the rocks. The temporal fracture is reaching back into the deep past, physically interacting with a living creature, extracting biological matter, and dropping it into a sealed container in the 1990s.
Completely bypassing the linear flow of time.
It's beyond comprehension.
And the retention of biological heat implies zero temporal decay. The transit from the ancient past to the present was instantaneous.
So Elias's deduction that the weather is recording us falls short of the true horror.
Way short. The environment is actively writing the script. It provided the dialogue via the walls, it provided the physical prop via the eagle feather, and it forced Elias to perfectly execute the localized paradoxical loop.
So the mountain isn't a passive hard drive. It is a highly aggressive, omnidirectional broadcaster. And Elias was merely a modern man armed with 1990s scientific vocabulary, right? He was completely unequipped to process a phenomenon that the indigenous populations of the region had observed, quantified, and named centuries before the first steel beam of Aegis 7 was ever forged.
And that's where the anthropological field notes in the dossier become so important. They provide the necessary cultural framework to understand the anomaly.
Because the indigenous history of the region does not rely on the language of quantum mechanics or temporal physics.
No, they categorize the phenomenon simply as the echo of the peak.
The echo of the peak. The terminology is brilliant because it captures the recursive nature of the mountain perfectly. The core tenet of the local lore focuses heavily on the behavior of time at specific hyper-localized altitudes.
Right, the notes translate their understanding of time not as a linear progression, but as a fluid dynamic.
The indigenous lore states that at the altitude of the Aegis 7 station, time ceases to flow and begins to pool like water.
And modeling time as a fluid dynamic experiencing gravitational disruption is an incredibly sophisticated indigenous framework. It perfectly maps to our discussions of space-time manipulation.
Yeah, if we look at the standard human perception of time as a fast-moving, unidirectional river, the current carries events forward constantly, right?
Always forward.
But if that temporal river strikes an invisible topological defect in space-time, a massive blockage, The water ceases to rush forward. It stagnates. It pools into deep, swirling eddies.
And when a current pools and circles back on itself, the objects submerged deep at the bottom of the riverbed are caught in the updraft and pulled to the surface.
Yes. The submerged debris rising to the surface represents the biological and acoustic artifacts breaking into the present. The genetic memory of an eagle submerged 10 millennia deep in the temporal pool flutes to the surface.
And the vocalizations of a captain 5 minutes downstream are caught in an eddy and dragged backward into his own present.
The pool eliminates the boundaries of epochs. Past, present, and future coexist in a chaotic, stagnant suspension.
And the anthropological maps included in the field notes confirm the darkest suspicion of the investigators.
Which is?
The Aegis 7 station was not constructed on an arbitrary piece of flat rock. The coordinates perfectly align with an area designated by the lore as a thin spot.
A thin spot. And that provides the ultimate contextualization for every piece of empirical data we have analyzed so far. Like, why do the optical shadows invert and ignore localized light?
Why does the kinetic energy of a dense metal violently distort the air?
Why does thermal equilibrium fail in a frozen environment? Because at those exact geographical coordinates, the foundational architecture of reality has eroded.
The insulation separating possible physics from impossible physics is completely compromised.
The physical erosion of reality is terrifying on its own, but the lore of the echo introduces a psychological caveat that dwarfs the fear of floating coins or warm feathers, because the true danger of the thin spot is not environmental.
No, it is internal.
The field notes issue a severe warning. If a human consciousness remains suspended in the temporal pool for an extended duration, the mountain ceases to broadcast ancient data and begins to actively broadcast the subject's own memories back into their mind.
The phenomenon weaponizes the neurological process of memory recall. Because, human memory is not a perfect read-only file.
Right. It's not like opening a video on your phone.
Exactly. Every time a memory is accessed, it is chemically reconstructed in the brain. The lore suggests the mountain hijacks this reconsolidation phase. It replays the memories, but it introduces subtle, catastrophic edits into the broadcast.
Edits. And the specific manipulation detailed in the lore targets the foundational pillar of human identity, which is connection. The mountain replays your memories, but it meticulously replaces the faces and voices of your loved ones with versions of them that never existed.
The psychological devastation of this process is absolute. Human identity is entirely constructed from our historical data and our interpersonal connections.
So if an external environmental force systemically overwrites that foundational data, if you access the memory of a parent or a child, and the face staring back at you in your own mind is a complete stranger, and the temporal pool chemically convinces your brain that this is the empirical truth.
It is the absolute dissolution of the self. You are no longer losing your mind, you are losing your entire recorded history.
Your consciousness is being actively overwritten, essentially turning you into a fictional character authored by a geological formation.
It's chilling.
It is. And this psychological destruction leads us to the final hidden revelation in the dossier regarding the true fate of the Aegis 7 crew, because the official government documentation cites severe budget deficits and logistical nightmares as the primary drivers for the 1994 decommissioning.
Right, a standard bureaucratic justification for abandoning a difficult project.
But the classified incident reports, they reveal the true catalyst for the immediate evacuation. It was not a financial decision.
Not at all.
The entire crew was extracted because they experienced the ultimate physical manifestation of the reality warping broadcast. They experienced a closed-loop temporal collision.
Yeah, the incident report describes the crew locked inside the sweltering 40-degree station, seeking refuge from the lethal, sub-zero blizzard raging outside.
And they approached the frost-covered windows and looked out into the storm, and standing outside in the lethal cold, staring back at them through the glass, were themselves.
The manifestation of physical doppelgangers represents a massive interference pattern in the fabric of reality.
The psychological impact of seeing your exact physical duplicate standing in an unsurvivable environment is staggering enough, but the report notes one final horrifying detail. The versions of the crew standing outside in the snow, they were slowly waving at the crew inside.
Which begs the question, are the future selves warning the past selves? Are they mocking them? Or are they simply a mindless echo repeating an action yet to be taken?
And if we cross-reference this doppelganger event with the very first physical anomaly we discussed, the inverted shadows, we can actually construct a unifying theory here.
Yes, Because we established earlier that the frozen shadows inside the room defied the red-hot transmitter and pointed directly toward the windows.
The shadows were pointing at the ambient light, or so we thought.
Right. Perhaps they were not reacting to the ambient light at all. If we apply the concept of a massive temporal mass distorting the local physics, perhaps the shadows were reacting to the impossibly dense presence of the future crew standing outside the glass.
Wait, so the doppelgangers in the snow were the true source of the anomaly?
Exactly. The shadows inside the room were physically stretching out, drawn by the immense gravitational pull of a paradoxical event. The shadows were pointing at the crew's own future selves.
Oh my God, that perfectly closes the loop. The shadows were reacting to the true anomaly, which is the temporal collision of the crew looking back at themselves. It is a flawless, inescapable nightmare of recursive physics.
It's all connected.
So let's pull back from the lore for a second and look at the entirety of what we've just explored. I want you, listening right now, to really attempt to synthesize the sheer scale of the impossibility we've laid out.
So let's take in.
It is. We are observing a localized environment where a frozen weather outpost burns from the inside out. We have optical shadows that invert and point toward time-traveling doppelgangers.
We have an unpowered machine acting as a transducer, screaming the genetic code of an extinct avian species into the void.
We have a charred journal documenting a man executing physical commands issued by his own future voice. And we have a geographical thin spot where time pools, stagnates, and slowly rewrites the neural pathways of your deepest memories.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, case file 55 sigma forces a radical, uncomfortable reassessment of how we classify our existence.
Because the anomalies on Blackwood Peak strongly suggest that reality, linear time, and physical laws are not the concrete, immutable foundations we believe them to be.
They are incredibly fragile. They are merely a localized broadcast signal, a frequency of existence that we are currently tuned into.
And on that specific peak, the insulation is stripped away and the signal is experiencing catastrophic reality-breaking interference.
Exactly.
It fundamentally highlights the extreme fragility of the signal we rely on every single day. The rules of the game can be suspended without warning. So I have to ask you, the listener, directly, what aspect of this deep dive unravels your comfort the most?
Is it the complete failure of the physical world? The vibrating dense metals and the shadows acting backward?
The sheer, terrifying paradox of an unpowered machine burning red hot? Or is it the invisible, creeping psychological horror? The realization that your memories, your identity, and your history are just data sets waiting to be overwritten by an environment that is actively recording your every move.
The dichotomy is profound. The terror of a physical universe breaking its own rules, contrasted with the terror of the internal consciousness being silently replaced.
They are both devastating in their own right. And as we close out this investigation, I want to leave you with one final, deeply unsettling thought to mull over on your own.
Because we have spent this entire time analyzing the Aegis 7 station and Blackwood Peak as a completely isolated, anomalous zone.
Right. We view the mountain as a unique, terrifying tape recorder, capable of absorbing biological data and broadcasting a human's unwritten future.
We view the environment as an active, aggressive participant in the construction of reality.
Exactly. But why do we assume that the capacity to record and broadcast is an exclusive property of that one specific mountain? I mean, Blackwood Peak is ultimately composed of rock, ice, and minerals, just like millions of other geographical locations on this planet.
It's just matter.
So look around your immediate environment right now. Look at the architecture of the room you are sitting in. Look at the interior of your car, the walls of your office, the ceiling of your bedroom.
Think about the physical space around you.
If a frozen, hostile peak possesses the inherent capability to retain the genetic code of a 10,000-year-old bird and broadcast a man's future actions through the walls, what are the walls of your own room recording at this exact second?
Every acoustic vibration, every physical action, every shed cell of biological data. The environment is always listening.
What if reality is constantly recording all of us, everywhere, continuously, and we simply lack the localized interference required to hear the playback? What if the absolute only difference between your comfortable living room and the horrific reality of Blackwood Peak is that the thin spot hasn't eroded under your floorboards yet?
It's a terrifying thought.
If the linear flow of time were to suddenly fail and pool where you are sitting right now, what submerged echoes of your forgotten past? Or far worse, what terrifying broadcasts of your unwritten future might start bleeding through your speakers or whispering out from the drywall? Keep a very close eye on your shadows. And if you ever notice them completely ignoring the lamp on your desk and pointing slowly toward the window, it might be time to run. Until next time, stay curious and keep diving deep.